She was accused of killing a billionaire's dog, but ended up saving his life. Before we begin, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us continue the story. Let us return to our main character. Karina Ortega never imagined that a single Tuesday evening would destroy everything she had worked for. She had only been inside Emerson Blakemore's penthouse for 10 minutes when it happened. The air smelled like polished marble and citrus cleaner, the type of scent only very wealthy people ever experienced on a daily basis. Titan, the Billionaire'S Belgian Malinois, lay near the wide glass windows overlooking the New York skyline. Karina had just placed his stainless steel bowl on the floor when he staggered, whimpered, and collapsed. The sound of metal hitting tile echoed through the enormous living space like a gunshot. Her heartbeat crashed against her ribs as Titan's body went still. She dropped to her knees, shaking his shoulder, whispering his name even though the dog had never known her voice. Two guards burst through the hallway, their boots thudding against the floor. Flashlights hit her face, blinding her. One of them shouted her name as if it was a curse, while another reached for his radio and called it in as an emergency. "Step away from the dog," the head of security barked. Karina froze, her palms hovering above the unmoving fur. Her words stumbled out of her mouth as tears filled her eyes. He just collapsed. "I did not do anything. Please, I did not do anything." But no one listened. Within seconds, the quiet luxury of the penthouse turned into a crime scene. More guards rushed in. Some photographed the bowl, others examined the bag of dog food, and one leaned in close enough for Karina to see the disappointment and disgust in his eyes. "Only you touched his food tonight," he said. "We have the logs." She tried to stand, but her knees shook violently. "Please, you do not understand. I followed every instruction. I never harmed him." A guard grabbed her arm, pulling her up roughly. In that moment, she felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. The weight of their accusations tightened around her chest like a rope. She looked around, searching for someone who might see her innocence. But the only answer was the cold silence of the penthouse and the bitter reflection of her own terrified face in the glossy floor. They dragged her past the living room, its enormous abstract paintings glowing under warm yellow lights. They moved through the hallway lined with black and white photographs of Emerson with Titan, photos that showed a bond deeper than most people ever shared with another human being. The guard's hands clamped around her arms as if she were some kind of monster. "Please," she whispered. "I tried to help him." No one reacted. They marched her into the control room where a wall of security monitors flickered with dozens of camera feeds. The head of security fast-forwarded through footage until they landed on the moment Karina poured Titan's meal. The screen glitched halfway through the clip. A brief 2-second blackout. Then it returned. The guards nodded to each other, convinced that the glitch was her fault, another trick. Karina's voice cracked. "The video did that on its own. I never touched the cameras." The head of security leaned forward, his face inches from hers. "Titan was the most valuable living thing to Mr. Blakemore. Do you understand that? And now he is gone because of you." She shook her head helplessly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, that is not true. I swear that is not true." But their minds were set. They escorted her to the private elevator without allowing her to say another word. As the doors closed, Karina caught a final glimpse of Titan's lifeless body near the massive window, framed by the glittering lights of the city below. Guilt that did not belong to her settled heavily in her chest. She wished she could scream loud enough for the world to hear her innocence. The elevator descended with a soft hum, its mirrored walls trapping her reflection from every angle. She saw fear. She saw humiliation. She saw a life that had just been ripped apart. When the doors opened into the underground parking garage, the cold night air rushed toward her. The guards pushed her forward as if they could not wait to be rid of her. "You will hear from our lawyers," one said. "And do not even think about coming near this building again." She barely managed to nod. Her throat was too tight for words. The city felt harsh and enormous as she stepped out into the open. She wrapped her arms around herself, her breath shaking. Everything she owned fit into the small tote bag slung over her shoulder. and everything she had tried to build for herself suddenly felt impossible to reach. Karina walked toward the street, numb from shock, unaware that her life had not been ruined yet. It had only just begun. Karina walked the long stretch of sidewalk back to her tiny studio apartment with the weight of the night pressing heavily against her shoulders. The city lights blurred behind the sting of tears, but she forced herself forward, step by shaky step. When she finally reached her building, the familiarity of its narrow hallway and peeling paint did not comfort her the way it usually did. She pushed open her door, flicked on the weak overhead light, and sank onto the edge of her small bed. The room felt colder than usual, as if the chill from the penthouse had followed her home. She wiped her cheeks with trembling hands and whispered into the quiet room that seemed too small for such a large heartbreak. I did everything right. I did everything they asked. The words sounded fragile, almost childish, but they were the truth. Her phone buzzed with 3 notifications. At first she thought they were from her mom, but when she unlocked the screen, she saw headlines from online news alerts. Billionaire Emerson Blakemore's beloved Belgian Malinois, Titan, dies under suspicious circumstances. Suspected staff member questioned. Karina's breath caught. Her hands shook so violently that she had to place the phone on the bed. She sat very still, staring at nothing, letting the words sink in until the hurt turned into a deep, heavy ache. She had not just lost a job. She had lost her name. She had lost whatever little safety she had built for herself. She curled forward and pressed her forehead against her knees. Her voice came out as a whisper cracked with despair. They will ruin me. She forced herself to stand, moving like someone underwater. She changed out of the work shirt still carrying Titan's scent and placed it gently on the back of a chair. She walked to the kitchenette and poured herself a glass of water, but her hands were still shaking so badly that some of it spilled onto the counter. She shut her eyes and inhaled slowly, trying to settle the chaos in her chest. She had to work the evening shift at the cafe in less than 12 hours. She had rent due in a week. She had no room in her life for a breakdown, even though every part of her wanted to collapse. She whispered to herself, "Keep going. Just one more day. Just keep going." It was something her mother used to say whenever life became unbearable, but the words felt thinner now, barely holding her together. Morning arrived too quickly. Karina dragged herself to the cafe, tying her apron behind her back while avoiding the curious glances of her coworkers. When she stepped behind the counter, she heard 2 customers murmuring near the pastry case. "She looks familiar," one whispered. "Is that the girl from the news?" Karina's throat tightened. She pretended to focus on refilling the coffee beans, but her hands trembled again. Her manager approached her quietly, his expression soft with worry. "If it gets too much, you can take a break," he said gently. Karina shook her head. "I need the hours." It was the only thing she managed to say. The door chimed as new customers entered. Some stared a little too long. Others whispered. One older woman gave her a sympathetic look before placing her order, as if sensing the storm behind Karina's eyes. But most people kept their distance, unsure if she was dangerous or simply unlucky. For the first time, Karina felt like she was living under a microscope, every gesture examined, every breath judged. She wanted to scream that she was innocent, but her voice stayed locked behind her ribs. When her shift ended, she stepped out into the parking lot and leaned against the cold metal of a street lamp. Her phone vibrated with a call from her mother. Karina answered with a soft, tired, "Hi, Mom." There was a long pause on the other end before her mother spoke, her voice quiet and trembling. "Sweetheart, are you okay? They are saying terrible things on the news." Karina pressed her. "Eyes shut. I did not do it, Mom. I swear I did not." Her mother exhaled shakily. "I believe you. But I am scared." Karina swallowed the lump in her throat. "I know. I am scared too." After the call, she stayed outside for a long moment, letting the cold settle over her skin. She needed air. She needed clarity. But mostly, she needed the truth to come out, because she could not live under the weight of a lie she never created. She hugged her arms around herself and whispered into the wind. "Please, someone has to believe me." She had no idea that someone would, someone she least expected, someone whose life was about to collide with hers again in a way that would change everything. Later that evening, as the sky dimmed into a deep blue and the city lights began flickering awake, Emerson Blakemore stood inside the high-security IT room of Blakemore Tower with attention he rarely showed to anyone. The room was chilled by powerful cooling vents, humming softly behind racks of servers that held every second of footage from his penthouse. His head of digital forensics, a precise man named Dalton Reeves, tapped rapidly on a keyboard while lines of code streamed across the screens. Emerson kept his arms crossed, his jaw locked tight. He had watched Titan collapse replayed on loop more times than he wanted to admit, but what bothered him more was the 2-second blackout that followed. He had already demanded Dalton isolate the cause, but the preliminary report only fueled something darker inside him. Dalton exhaled through his nose and turned toward him. "Sir, someone hacked the camera system. This blackout was not an accident." Emerson felt a coldness spread through his chest. "Can you determine who did it?" Dalton shook his head. "Not yet. It was masked. Someone inside had access." Emerson stared at the glitch on the screen, that jarring cut in the footage. "Then find out who. Titan did not die because of an accident. Someone wanted me to believe Karina was at fault." His voice was low and controlled, but something in it trembled with restrained fury. Across the city, Karina stepped out of the cafe and hugged her thin jacket closer to her body as evening settled in. The sky felt heavier than before, as though the weight of the day had followed her. She made her way toward the subway station, trying to keep her head down, but even so, two strangers near the entrance whispered when they recognized her. She hurried her steps, heart hammering. When she sat on a bench inside the mostly empty car, she stared ahead without blinking. Her mind drifted back to Titan, to his eyes dimming in front of her, to the disbelief of the guards, to her own helplessness. She pressed a hand to her chest as her breath tightened again. Someone else was there, she whispered to herself. She remembered a sound that night, something faint near the utility cabinet where Titan's medications were kept. A soft click, like a latch. She had dismissed it, thinking it was normal. Now she wondered if that moment had been the beginning of everything. Emerson, meanwhile, walked through the corridor outside the IT room, passing framed photos of Blakemore Innovations milestones. His assistant hurried beside him, offering updates, but Emerson barely listened. His gaze was distant, replaying the terrified look on Karina's face as the guards had dragged her out. At the time, he had been too stunned by Titan's collapse to think clearly. Now, with every new detail, his certainty began to crack. He entered the private elevator and pressed the button to the ground floor. When the doors closed, for the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and he could no longer ignore the instincts that had served him for years in business and in life. He murmured to himself, if she did not do it, then who would benefit from this? A troubling question lingered without an answer. At the same time, Karina arrived back at her apartment building. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and detergent. As she reached her door, she noticed an envelope taped crookedly near the lock. She removed it cautiously and stepped inside before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note, shaky and rushed, from a former housekeeper she barely remembered seeing during her short time at the penthouse. The note read, "I cannot be seen with you, but I need to tell you something. Someone opened Titan's medication cabinet the night before he died. It was not you. Be careful." Karina felt her pulse surge. She sank onto her bed, clutching the note with both hands. Proof. A whisper of truth. Something real at last. She read the words again, as if they might vanish if she blinked too long. Someone opened Titan's medication cabinet. Someone else had touched the place where his supplements and medical items were kept. Her thoughts raced. This could mean everything, or it could mean nothing if no one believed her. But to her, it was the first breath of relief she had felt since the nightmare began. Meanwhile, Emerson sat alone in the back seat of his black SUV as it pulled away from the tower. He leaned his head back, eyes closing for a moment. Titan had been with him through more storms than most people knew. Losing him was a wound Emerson had tried to numb with anger and certainty, but now, doubt crept in like a thin line of light under a locked door. He reached into his coat and pulled out Titan's metal tag, something he had carried for comfort. His grip tightened around it as he whispered, "I will not let this go unanswered." His eyes opened again, sharper than before. Someone had set him up. Someone had manipulated the system. And someone wanted him to lose more than just a dog. As the SUV moved through the glowing streets of the city, Emerson instructed his driver, "Take me to the penthouse. I need to look at everything again." Far across town, Karina sat on her bed holding the note, unaware that Emerson, for the first time, was beginning to question everything he thought he knew. Their paths were shifting toward each other again, drawn by the same force, the need for the truth. The following evening, the city pulsed with its usual energy as Karina made her way to the downtown hotel where she worked evening shifts for extra income. The gala event had already begun by the time she arrived, the grand ballroom glowing under crystal chandeliers and warm golden lights. Wealthy guests in elegant suits and gowns moved through the room with champagne flutes in hand, their laughter floating above the soft hum of a live jazz band. Karina tied her black apron tightly, pushed her hair behind her ears, and forced herself to breathe steadily. She needed the shift. She needed the money. She hoped no one here would recognize her from the news, but a quiet worry sat in her stomach like a stone. She carried a tray of sparkling water across the ballroom, careful to avoid eye contact with anyone who lingered too long. For a moment, she felt almost invisible among the polished marble columns and glittering lights. But the illusion shattered the moment the crowd shifted and a familiar presence stepped into the room. Emerson Blakemore entered the ballroom with the kind of authority that demanded attention. Cameras flashed immediately as photographers recognized him. Guests murmured with interest, their heads turning. Emerson scanned the room with a composed expression, though a subtle tension sat in the lines around his eyes. He was not here to socialize. He had come because his corporate foundation was sponsoring the event, but beneath that calm exterior, he was distracted by questions he still could not answer. When his gaze swept across the room, he saw her. Karina stood stiffly near the refreshment table, her tray clutched in both hands, her eyes lowering the instant she realized he was looking at her. Something in Emerson's chest tightened, not with anger this time, but with an uncomfortable awareness that he may have been wrong. The doubt he had tried to ignore all day returned, stronger than before. He walked toward her without fully meaning to, the crowd parting instinctively around him. Karina felt the air shift when he approached, and her pulse jumped despite her efforts to remain composed. Emerson stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the faint cologne she remembered from the penthouse. His voice came out colder than he intended. "We need to talk." Karina stiffened, her fingers tightening around the tray. "There is nothing left for me to say, sir. You already believe the worst." Emerson exhaled slowly, struggling between old anger and new uncertainty. "I need to understand exactly what happened that night." Karina's eyes filled with a familiar pain. "You already made up your mind." A guest passing by glanced at them curiously, and Emerson immediately took Karina by the elbow and led her toward the service corridor behind the ballroom. The hallway was narrow, lined with crates of unused glassware and laundry carts filled with linens. Karina pulled her arm back, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this? To accuse me again?" Emerson shook his head. "No, to find answers." Karina stared at him, confused. Emerson ran a hand through his hair, something he rarely did, revealing the frustration twisting inside him. "Someone hacked my cameras. Someone tampered with footage. Someone inside my building had access. I cannot ignore that anymore." Karina blinked in shock. She had hoped he would realize something was wrong, but hearing it from him felt surreal. Before she could speak, a worker pushing a cart passed by, and Emerson stepped closer to keep the conversation private. "Tell me everything you remember. Every sound, every detail." Karina swallowed hard. There was a noise near the medication cabinet the night before Titan collapsed. A click, like someone closing a door or a latch. Emerson's expression hardened. Someone was tampering with Titan's medical supplies. Karina nodded slowly. "I did not know what it meant. But I found a note today from a former staff member. He said he saw someone at that cabinet too." Emerson felt a sharp jolt of urgency. "You still have the note?" Karina nodded. "Yes." Emerson took a breath and lowered his voice. "I need to see it." Before she could respond, one of the gala managers stepped into the hallway, calling for her. "Karina, table 8 needs service." She nodded quickly, then looked back at Emerson with hesitation. He studied her for a moment longer. For the first time, he looked at her not as a suspect, but as someone who might hold the key to everything. "Meet me after your shift," he said quietly. "Please." The words sounded foreign in his mouth, heavy with sincerity. Karina stared at him, trying to decide if this was another trap or the first real moment of truth. she finally whispered, "All right." Later, when the gala ended and guests filtered out into the cold night air, Karina stepped outside the service entrance, hugging her coat around herself. A sleek black SUV waited near the curb. Emerson stood beside it, the cold wind brushing through his dark hair. When she approached, he opened the back door for her, and she hesitated only a second before getting in. As the car pulled away from the hotel, the city lights reflected across Emerson's face, and his voice was quiet but resolute. "If someone killed Titan to get to me, then we are both in far more danger than we realized." Karina looked down at her hands, then slowly lifted the folded note from her pocket. The truth was finally beginning to take shape, and with it came a fear she could not name. Karina unfolded the note inside the dimly lit SUV, her hands trembling slightly as she passed it to Emerson. He took it carefully, studying every stroke of the rushed handwriting. The words were uneven and shaky, but the message was clear. Someone who had worked inside his penthouse had seen suspicious activity near Titan's medical cabinet. Emerson read the note twice, then 3 times, as if he needed certainty to anchor the storm building inside him. When he finally lowered it, his jaw tightened, and his eyes held a sharpness that had not been there before. "This is not a coincidence," he said softly. "Whoever did this knew exactly how much Titan meant to me and how to weaponize that." Karina watched him, trying to read the shifting emotions in his expression, but he guarded them too well. She hesitated before speaking. "Why would anyone want to hurt your dog?" Emerson looked out the tinted window at the passing city lights. "To send a message, and to make sure I was looking in the wrong direction." The SUV turned toward the private entrance of Blakemore Tower. When the car stopped, Emerson stepped out first, then motioned for Karina to follow. The night air was cold but crisp, brushing lightly against her face as she exited the vehicle. She had never been inside the corporate building through its private floors, and the sheer height of the glass structure made her feel very small. Emerson led her through a secure elevator that required multiple levels of biometric identification. The elevator doors opened to a quiet executive lobby with dark wood panels and a panoramic view of the city. It felt like a place where secrets lived in silence. Emerson walked ahead, his steps controlled but tense, and Karina followed closely, unsure of what they would find next. He brought her into a private conference room that overlooked Manhattan in all its glittering expanse. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar, with recessed lighting casting a soft glow over the long table. Emerson closed the door behind them, then placed the note on the table between them. "Tell me everything," he said. "Every detail you can remember about your time in the penthouse." Karina inhaled deeply, gathering her thoughts. She told him about the schedule she had been given, the instructions for Titan's diet, the quiet moments she spent sitting at the edge of the room while the dog paced or napped. She told him about the strange sound she heard the night before Titan collapsed, a click that did not belong to her movements. Emerson listened intently, never interrupting, his hands folded tightly in front of him. After she finished, he exhaled slowly. "There was someone else there," he murmured. "Someone who should not have been." Karina nodded faintly, relief and fear mixing in her chest. "I always sensed something strange that night, but I did not know what it meant. I thought it was just me being nervous in such a wealthy place." Emerson looked at her, not with pity, but with something quieter, something unexpectedly human. "You were not wrong, and you were not imagining it." Suddenly, a soft knock sounded on the conference room door. Emerson's assistant entered hesitantly, holding a tablet. "Sir, I found something you may want to see." Emerson took the device, his eyes narrowing as he scrolled through the recovered security logs. Karina leaned closer without realizing it. The assistant pointed to a timestamp. "This segment was scrubbed, but our system created an auto backup. It captured someone entering the hallway leading to Titan's cabinet." Emerson tapped the screen, and though the figure was blurry, the outline was unmistakable. A tall silhouette wearing a dark jacket moved with precision, as though familiar with the building's blind spots. Karina felt her breath catch. "That is not me," she whispered. Emerson shook his head. "No, it is someone who wanted it to look like you." He set the tablet down, his expression darkening. "There is something else," the assistant added quietly. "The person entered using a staff access card registered to someone who resigned 3 days before Titan died." Emerson's eyes hardened. "Someone inside my company is helping them." Karina felt a chill spread across her skin. The truth was becoming clearer and far more dangerous than she imagined. Emerson stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. This was never about you. This was about hurting me. Karina looked into his eyes, seeing not the cold billionaire she had first met, but a man carrying a wound deeper than he had let anyone see. The room felt heavier, as if the walls themselves understood the gravity of what was emerging. In that moment, standing under the dim lights of the conference room, with the city shimmering below, Karina realized that her life and Emerson's had become entangled in a way neither of them had chosen. She also realized that the nightmare she thought she had escaped was only the beginning. Emerson did not wait for morning. The moment the security logs revealed the shadowed figure and the stolen access card, he ordered a full internal lockdown of the executive floors, though he did it quietly enough that only a handful of trusted staff knew anything unusual was happening. Karina stood near the window of the conference room, her hands pressed together tightly as she tried to process everything that was unfolding around her. The city stretched below her like a glittering ocean, but instead of feeling vast and beautiful, it felt tense and dangerous. Emerson stepped away to take a private call with the head of his security team, his voice low and sharp with controlled urgency. She heard fragments of the conversation through the glass wall. Do not alert the board yet. Someone inside is working against us. No, I do not know their endgame, but Titan was never the target. I was. Karina's stomach clenched at the confirmation. She had suspected this, but hearing Emerson say it so plainly made the hairs on her arms rise. When he returned to the room, his face was more tense than before, though he tried to mask it. I want you to stay here for a little while, he said. It is safer than being out in the open. Karina shook her head, fear flickering in her eyes. Safer from who? I still do not understand what they want. Emerson hesitated, then answered with a heaviness that suggested he had been holding this truth for far longer than the past few hours. Blakemore Innovations is about to finalize a major acquisition. Billions are at stake. Some people want control so badly that they will remove anything in their way. Karina swallowed hard. Including you? Emerson nodded. Including me. For a moment, silence settled between them, deep and real. Karina looked at him with a mixture of fear and sympathy. She did not know this world of power struggles and high-stakes business, but she could feel its danger pressing in from all sides. A sudden buzz echoed across the room. Emerson glanced at his phone, his expression shifting. Instantly, someone just used an override code in my penthouse, he said. Nobody should be there. Karina's heart dropped. What does that mean? Emerson grabbed his coat. It means they are not finished. Against her better judgment, Karina stepped forward. You should not go alone. Emerson looked at her, the corner of his expression softening. I will not, but I need you to come with me. Her breath caught at the unexpected request. Why me? Because you are the only one I trust right now. The words hit her like a quiet shock. For a moment she hesitated, then nodded, though her pulse thudded loudly in her ears. Minutes later, they were in the private elevator descending to the underground garage. Emerson's security driver opened the door of the black SUV, and they climbed in. The ride to the penthouse was silent except for the hum of the engine. Karina clutched the note in her jacket pocket as though it could protect her. Emerson stared out the window, his jaw tight, his thoughts clearly racing. When they arrived, the building lobby was empty, and the night concierge pretended everything looked normal, though his eyes flicked nervously toward the elevators. Emerson led Karina through a side entrance toward a private lift accessible only through fingerprint and retinal scan. Her breath hitched as the elevator doors closed, carrying them upward. When the doors opened, the penthouse was dark, lit only by the glow of the city flooding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Emerson signaled for Karina to stay behind him as they stepped inside. They moved cautiously toward the main living area. The air felt heavier, almost electric. Then, just as they passed the hallway leading toward his office, a sudden metallic click echoed through the space. Karina recognized it immediately. It was the same sound she had heard near Titan's medication cabinet. Before she could warn him, the sharp crack of a gunshot sliced through the air. A flash of light burst from the far end of the room. Emerson froze for a fraction of a second. Karina did not. She lunged forward with pure instinct, grabbing his arm and dragging him down behind the marble kitchen island just as a second shot ricocheted off the glass railing above them. Emerson's eyes widened in shock as he landed hard beside her. Karina's breath came in small, sharp bursts, but her voice was steady enough to whisper, "They are trying to kill you." Emerson touched the side of her face lightly, as if making sure she was real, alive. "You just saved my life," he breathed. Footsteps thundered through the hallway as security finally rushed in, shouting commands and sweeping the rooms with flashlights. Karina stayed tucked against Emerson, her heart pounding, knowing that her life had changed in a single breath. And somewhere in the shadows of the penthouse, the person who had pulled the trigger slipped away, leaving behind only the sound of fading footsteps and the chilling truth that the danger was far from over. Chaos erupted the moment the gunshots stopped echoing through the penthouse. Emerson's security team swarmed the living area, their heavy boots slamming against the polished floor as they spread out in tight formation. Flashlights cut through the dimness, sweeping across the hallways and corners where shadows clung stubbornly to the walls. Karina stayed close to Emerson, her breath still trembling from the adrenaline that had not yet left her body. She felt the aftershock in her bones, a tremor that reminded her how close they had come to losing everything in a single instant. Emerson gently steadied her with a hand on her shoulder, but the look in his eyes shifted sharply when two guards approached them with guns still drawn. The guards exchanged a glance, and the taller one spoke first. "Sir, step away from her. We need to separate you both until we assess the situation." Karina's heart dropped. Emerson straightened, disbelief flashing across his face. "She saved my life," he said with controlled anger. The guard did not flinch, or she staged the situation to get close enough to do harm. "We do not know yet." Karina felt numb, as though someone had pulled the floor out from beneath her. "I would never do that," she whispered, but her voice sounded small in the chaos. Two additional guards moved toward her, and even though they did not grab her roughly, the implication was clear. Emerson stepped forward immediately. "Do not touch her," he commanded, his voice low and cold. But procedure overtook emotion. The head of security, a stern man named Ridge, approached with a hardened expression. "Sir, with all due respect, we cannot rule out her involvement. The shooter escaped. Someone tampered with access codes. The breach happened shortly after you left with her." Karina's eyes widened with shock. "I did not touch anything. I did not know any codes." But Ridge only tightened his jaw. "Everything points to an inside lead. Someone who knew your movement patterns. Someone who knew you would return to the penthouse. Someone close." Emerson tried to argue, but the situation moved too quickly. The guards gently but firmly placed Karina in handcuffs. She gasped as the cold metal closed around her wrists. Emerson took a step closer, but Ridge blocked him. "Sir, this is temporary. We cannot risk anything until we secure the building." Karina looked at Emerson, her voice cracking. "I was trying to help you. I saved you." Emerson looked torn, his expression filled with frustration and something deeper, something heavier. "I know," he said. "I know you did." But he was only one man against an entire security protocol designed to neutralize threats, not listen to explanations. They escorted Karina through the wide hallway of the penthouse, past the shattered glass railing and the still smoking bullet holes in the wall. The scene looked like a battlefield, the quiet luxury destroyed by violence. She kept her head forward, refusing to cry, even as the fear pressed against her throat like a tightening rope. Emerson followed close behind, arguing with Ridge, demanding they stop, insisting she had nothing to do with it. But Ridge shook his head. "Sir, our job is to protect you, even if you do not like how that looks." The elevator doors opened with a cold mechanical chime. As the guards guided her inside, Karina turned her head just enough to catch Emerson's eyes. For a moment, the world fell completely silent. His eyebrows were drawn together in guilt and conflict, his breath heavy as though he carried the weight of two impossible truths. She forced a small whisper from her trembling lips. "I did not hurt Titan. I did not hurt you." Emerson took a step toward the elevator, but the guards blocked him. His voice broke in a way she had never heard before. "Karina, listen to me. I will fix this. I swear I will fix this." The elevator doors slid shut between them, dividing their worlds with a clean, merciless line. Karina closed her eyes as the elevator descended, tears finally slipping down her cheeks in the privacy of the cold steel box. She had saved his life, but once again, she was the one being dragged away as if she were the threat. Downstairs, the building's security checkpoint buzzed with reports and radio chatter as officers prepared to hand her over to the city police for questioning. Karina felt the world tilt dangerously around her, fear knotting her stomach into something sharp and painful. She had no power, no evidence, and no protection. And yet, one truth stayed bright in her mind even as the guards escorted her toward the waiting patrol cars. Emerson had seen her. Emerson had believed her. Emerson was fighting for her. She clung to that truth as the night swallowed her whole, unaware that this moment, the moment she was taken away, would become the turning point that changed everything that came next. Emerson did not wait for permission, approval, or protocol. The second the elevator doors closed on Karina, a fire lit inside him that overrode every rule he had written for his own security team. He stormed back into the penthouse living area, his voice sharp and commanding as he confronted Ridge. "You made a mistake," he said, stepping closer until Ridge stiffened. "She saved my life. She did not orchestrate it." Ridge kept his composure, but the tension around his mouth betrayed him. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but we cannot overlook that someone clearly fed information to the shooter. The timing aligns with your departure from the tower with her." Emerson shook his head. "No, the breach happened before we left. Whoever targeted me planned it long before she came into the picture, and they used her as a scapegoat because they knew she would not be able to defend herself." Ridge hesitated, but Emerson continued with unwavering determination. "Release every piece of recovered footage to me now, and assemble the full digital forensics team. We will not spend another second pointing fingers at the wrong person." Within minutes, Emerson was back in the executive IT room, the glow of multiple screens illuminating the stern lines of his face. Dalton Reeves, the digital forensics lead, typed rapidly, pulling up layers of data from the corrupted camera logs. Emerson's eyes were sharp, filled with a relentless focus as he stood behind him. "Check the timestamps again," he ordered. "Compare the override code used in the penthouse to all recorded codes used this month." Dalton nodded, adjusting the settings. "Already running it, sir." A moment later, a progress bar flashed on the screen, followed by a list of access codes. Emerson's eyes scanned the data, and then he saw it. A single code appearing twice, once 2 nights before Titan collapsed, and once an hour before the gunman entered the penthouse. The code belonged to a former employee who had resigned suspiciously and suddenly. Emerson clenched his jaw. He did not resign. He was bought. Dalton nodded grimly. "And whoever bought him has access to your internal movement schedule." Emerson's pulse quickened. "Where is Karina now?" Dalton glanced at the security feed. "They are taking her to the precinct for questioning. They want to hold her until the investigation clears." Emerson stepped back, his breath tight with anger. "No, she is not going to sit in a cell because my own people failed to protect my home." He grabbed his coat and turned sharply. "Prepare the evidence. I will take it to the police myself." Dalton blinked. "All of it, at once." Emerson's voice did not waver. "Every piece. Every file. I want them to see the truth." Across the city, Karina sat inside a cold interrogation room at the precinct, her wrists still marked from the cuffs even after they removed them. The metal table felt freezing against her palms. 2 officers spoke quietly outside the glass window, glancing at her occasionally with a mixture of suspicion and sympathy. She stared down at her trembling hands, feeling the exhaustion settle heavily into her bones. She had saved Emerson's life, and still she was treated like a danger. A quiet ache filled her chest as she whispered to herself, "How much more do I have to endure?" The door swung open, and her heart jumped, expecting another round of questions. Instead, Emerson Blakemore walked in with a storm behind his eyes and a stack of digital files under his arm. The officers straightened instantly. Emerson placed the files on the table with a firm thud. "This woman does not belong here," he said, his voice steady but edged with steel. "She saved my life, and I can prove she had nothing to do with any of this." The lead officer raised his eyebrows, taken aback by the billionaire's intensity. "Mr. Blakemore, we have procedures." Emerson cut him off calmly, but with unmistakable authority. "Procedures? That cannot override the truth. And the truth is in this data." The officer reluctantly opened the files while Emerson stood tall beside Karina, his presence grounding her in a way she had not expected. The evidence was clear: hacked camera feeds, stolen access codes, a former employee involved in multiple breaches, and a timeline that proved Karina had no way of orchestrating the attack. When the officer finally looked up, his tone shifted. "Miss Ortega, you are free to go. We are very sorry for the misunderstanding." Karina's breath caught, not quite believing the words. Emerson extended his hand toward her. "Come with me," he said quietly, not as a command, but as an invitation. When they stepped outside the precinct, the night air wrapped around them with a chilling stillness. Emerson walked beside her, his expression no longer clouded with suspicion, but filled with something gentler and heavier. "I meant what I said inside," he told her softly. "I will fix the damage they caused you, and I will make whoever did this regret underestimating either of us." Karina looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know why this happened to me." Emerson paused. "Because someone thought you were expendable. But they were wrong." A black SUV pulled up to the curb, and Emerson opened the door for her. The city hummed around them, but their world felt narrowed to a single moment. As Karina stepped inside the car, she understood one thing clearly. She was no longer alone in this fight. And neither was he. The morning after Karina was released from the precinct, Emerson Blakemore walked into the press conference hall of Blakemore Tower with a purpose that carried more weight than any announcement he had ever made. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and board members who had been summoned on short notice. Karina stood just behind the small stage, out of sight, her heart pounding as she listened to the hum of voices. She had no idea what Emerson planned to say, only that he had asked her to be here and assured her, with quiet conviction, that the truth would finally come to light. When he stepped up to the podium, the room fell completely silent. Emerson spoke with the steady tone of a man who had carried too many secrets for too long. He explained the breach in his penthouse security system, the hacked cameras, the stolen access codes, and the deliberate attempt on his life. He revealed the involvement of the former employee and the role that person had played in the manipulation of footage to frame an innocent woman. Then, without hesitation, he stated clearly and publicly that Karina Ortega had been falsely accused, that she had saved his life, and that she had been treated unjustly because she had been the easiest person to blame. The room erupted with questions, flashes from cameras, and murmurs of shock. Emerson ignored them all. Instead, he looked toward the hallway where Karina stood, his voice softening just enough for anyone watching closely to notice. "I owe my life to someone who had every reason to walk away, but chose courage instead." Karina's breath caught as Emerson stepped aside from the podium and beckoned her forward. Her legs trembled, but she gathered every ounce of strength to walk out in front of the cameras. Reporters called her name, asking for comments, details, explanations, but she stayed silent, her eyes focused on Emerson, who stood just inches away, offering her the steadiness she needed. After the conference, they stepped out onto the private terrace behind the hall, where the morning sun cast a soft glow over the city. The chaos of the crowd faded behind them as the glass doors shut. For the first time since the nightmare began, Karina felt the air move easily through her lungs. Emerson turned toward her, and there was no distance in his expression, no coldness, no barriers. Only sincerity. "I cannot change what happened to you, but I can make sure it never happens again," he said quietly. Karina looked down, her fingers tightening around the railing. "You already did more than you had to. You believed me when no one else did." Emerson shook his head. "I should have believed you from the beginning. I let my fear blind me. Titan trusted you. I should have trusted him too." Her eyes softened at the mention of Titan, the dog whose loss had started everything. Emerson reached into his coat and pulled out Titan's silver name tag, polished and gleaming. He placed it gently into her hand. "I carried this every day, but it belonged with someone who protected what he meant to me." Karina stared at the tag, her throat tightening with emotion. "This is too much," she whispered. "No," Emerson replied, his voice low and warm. "It is not enough. Not compared to what you did for me." He stepped closer, his presence steady and comforting. The city stretched endlessly behind them, but the moment felt intimate, small, and deeply real. "Karina, you risked everything for me. Let me walk forward with you," he said, his words carrying both promise and vulnerability. She lifted her gaze to his, seeing truth, gratitude, and something unmistakably tender within him. The fear that had once gripped her heart melted slowly into something gentler, something she had not dared to feel. "I think," she whispered, "this is the first time in a long time that I feel safe." Emerson smiled, a real, unguarded smile that transformed the sharp lines of his face. "Then stay," he said simply. She nodded, the morning sun warming her tear-streaked cheeks. Together, they stepped back inside, their paths no longer running parallel in fear, but intertwined in a future built not from power or wealth, but from the simple, undeniable truth that she had saved his life,